First is that the Masters is ranked 4th in importance by Gary Player and Jack Nicklaus. And I think this is worth talking about for a couple of different reasons. And Golf Channel actually very rightly pointed this out, and I did not know this, but it gives them a chance to kind of bring themselves into the conversation. Gary Player is one of 5 guys to have ever won the career Grand Slam. So he's got them all. He's got the Masters, the PGA, the US Open, and the Open Championships. Won 9 major titles. He's one of the honorary starters for the Masters. He is the 1978 Masters champion. He has done the job. So he has a very unique perspective, and you can't be very unique, but you do have a unique perspective on this. And he was asked in an interview with the Daily Mail where he ranked all 4 men's major championships in terms of importance to him. And this is kind of setting the golf because he ranks the Masters 4th. So here's the quote from him. Quote, "But never mind the Masters, the Open is by far the greatest tournament on the planet. I rate the Open at 1, the US Open 2, PGA 3, and Augusta 4. 4 marvelous tournaments," end quote. And of course that's kind of been taken as it is. And you go, wait, this guy's an honorary starter at the Masters. He shows up every year on the first tee. He's done this for a decade plus. And now he's saying that the Masters is 4th best. How is that humanly possible? And then kind of dig in a little bit on the quote, and he explains himself a little bit. And I think really all of this comes down to how he feels about the age of the tournaments. And he explains that the Masters is the youngest of the majors. That's a direct quote from him. And because it's the youngest of the majors, he feels it might always be 4th, is kind of what he's implying, because it'll never catch up to the history of the other 3, because they're all older. They're all in triple digits at this point, and obviously the Masters is not yet in terms of existence. And unless they stop playing the US Open, the Open, and the PGA for about 30 years, it's not going to even come close to catching up to any of them. So from that perspective, I guess that kind of makes sense. But people are kind of all aghast about it. And I think some of the reaction probably has to do with how Augusta National has been treating his son Wayne. Remember when Lee Elder had his opportunity to be the honorary starter just before he passed away. He didn't hit a shot, but standing behind Lee Elder as part of this ceremony, it was really, really important because as the first African-American Masters contestant, Lee Elder is incredibly important in the history of the tournament and was incredibly important to Tiger Woods' life. And Wayne is standing there, Wayne Player standing there with a sleeve of Encore golf balls, which was a sponsor of Gary Player at the time. And I have no problem with Encore sponsoring Gary Player. Go for it. But in that moment, it was really not the right thing to do in an emotional situation to kind of flash a sponsor cameo, so to speak, kind of an integration that maybe a PR person might love, but super cringeworthy. And the Augusta National has not been particularly happy with Wayne since that happened. And from accounts, he is no longer welcome on the grounds. And so people think, okay, well, go back to that incident. Surely Gary Player's a little salty about that, and that's why he's ranking the Masters 4th. And there may be some influence on that. Don't get me wrong. I'm pretty sure there probably has to be some. You can't be thrilled about that. But then you've got people on Twitter calling for him to not be an honorary starter anymore and take it away, and how can Augusta National stand this, and maybe it's just going to be Tom Watson and Jack Nicklaus. Well, hold your horses on that, because as Golf Channel rightly points out, and because this involves them, they know this, Nicklaus was interviewed for a Golf Channel documentary called Jack, which first aired in 2017. They air every now and then. Nicklaus said the Masters was 4th, and he's the one who's won it the most. He said, quote, "I have the US Open as the number 1 tournament." Then he listed the Open Championship at number 2, and he said that the Open preference between the two was because he's an American, and that for the rest of the world, the British Open is probably the number 1 tournament. So for him being an American, winning his national championship was very important. He ranked the PGA 3rd, and then ranked the Masters 4th, and he said, quote, "The Masters falls 4th because it's not meant to be ahead of those others. The Masters tournament is not a championship. You can't rank a tournament ahead of championships," end quote. And if you think about those things, the names, the actual formal names of these tournaments, the US Open is the US Open Championship. The Open is the Open Championship. The PGA is the PGA Championship. The Masters is the Masters Tournament. And for whatever reason, championship in Nicklaus's mind means more than tournament. Now, if you were going to make me try to make a distinction between the 4 majors, I think you would say, hey, you've got the Opens, although they aren't quite as open as they once were, right? They've got exemption criteria, and the Open Championship certainly isn't as open as it once was. It's nowhere near. At least the U.S. Open has a good chunk of its field, good, 30, 40% of the field comes from qualifying, comes from sectional and final qualifying. The Open isn't really that way anymore. You've got not even 15% of the field comes from open qualifying. So the open aspect of that doesn't mean something. But to Nicklaus, championship versus tournament means something. Maybe that explains how he feels about the Players' Championship. So if you asked him to include the Players' Championship, where does that fit as a championship against the Masters tournament? It also might explain why his tournament on the PGA Tour is called the Memorial Tournament, not the Memorial Championship. He sees a very clear distinction between those things. So to bring it all together, it seems like the greatest players of all time think the Masters as an invitational tournament is not as highly ranked as the others. And Nicklaus said in this interview from 2017, or when he put it together, maybe it was 4/17, who knows. But he said, quote, most people would put the Masters number 1, and that's okay. I'd put the Masters number 1 as far to play in and enjoy doing that kind of stuff. But as far as importance of the game and being American, the U.S. Open is number 1, end quote. And I think if you ask people to rank the 4 majors, a lot of people would say the Masters is number 1 if you're in this country. If you're outside this country, a lot of people would say the Open Championship. And maybe for some people for foreign-born, the Masters is number 1 for them. But I think the Open with the longest history probably, and also because it's the only one outside of the United States, also has kind of increased its reputation among international golf fans over the years. And that all kind of makes sense. I don't think anyone would rank the PGA Championship number 1 for any reason. And no offense to the PGA Championship. It is a fantastic tournament, and it really is important to the history of golf. But I don't think anyone picks that as number 1. So then you've got it down to the other 3. And I think for a lot of golf fans, because they've become intimately familiar with Augusta National, because they see the same course every year, because of the drama, because of the smaller field, that ranks number 1 for them. And then they're all aghast when other folks who have accomplished a lot in the game might say, well, it's not my number 1. It might be the one I want to win, which is the one Nicklaus said. This is the one tournament I wanted to win. I wanted to win the first major of the year. It was the one I put my entire year's work into, trying to win that major championship and start the year with a major championship win. But at the end, for whatever reason, for him, being an American is more important, and winning the national championship is more important. I think if you ask a lot of people these days, the U.S. Open would fall to 3rd or 4th in their ranking. But everyone's a little bit different, and I don't think necessarily we should be aghast that these guys have opinions and that they're willing to share them. Hey, it is what it is. So I don't think that they're necessarily wrong. Once you kind of read their explanation, Jax is very semantic in nature. What is a championship? And maybe that goes back to the history in the 1934, 1935 of, hey, let's call this an invitational tournament because it is the Augusta National Invitation Tournament, not the Augusta National Invitation Championship. So I don't know, but I think because of Wayne Player's situation with Augusta National, there's some thought that he's just salty. Gary Player's just salty. And I don't necessarily think that's the case. So wanted to go through all that because it made a whole lot of headlines. And I think when Golf Channel's story about it popped up in their interview with Jack, obviously they're talking about it because it's their production. But I think that makes total sense to me in terms of how the prism through which these guys are seeing it. But if you ask 10 other great professionals, I don't know exactly what they would come down with. And it would probably be a little bit different, probably spread out. And that's the great thing about the majors. They all do have a different character, a different quality, a different emotional level. So, again, I don't think many would say the PGA Championship is number 1, but you might get one. I don't know. Because, there are enough players over the years whose parents or they themselves were PGA of America professionals. And so for them, winning the PGA of America's championship meant for professional golfers, albeit in a different context, is a very important thing for them.